Welcome in everybody to a deep dive into the world of James Baldwin. We're going to be exploring his life, his works, and really kind of dissecting the experiences that shaped his powerful voice and, his legacy as a writer and activist. We've got an incredible resource to help us on this journey, an episode of the American History Tellers podcast called The Exile, which digs deep into Baldwin's story.
Even if you're familiar with Baldwin's name, I think you'll find this deep dive really fascinating. It's about going beyond just the surface level and uncovering the man behind the words, the personal struggles, societal forces that really fueled his writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what's so compelling about Baldwin. It's like he's not just some distant literary figure. His work feels so immediate, so personal. And to really understand that power, we have to go back to the beginning, back to 1924 Harlem. So imagine growing up in poverty, right? The shadow of the Great Depression looming over everything. And then to top it off, you've got this complex relationship with a bitter stepfather.
Yeah.
That was Baldwin's reality.
Yeah. And that bitterness, stemming from his own upbringing. His stepfather was the son of enslaved people, so you can imagine the weight of history. He carried the hardship. And it created this difficult environment for young James, a stark contrast to the loving relationship he had with his mother. It's almost like these opposing forces, this darkness and light, laid the foundation for the powerful contrasts we see in his writing later on.
It's incredible to think about how those early experiences, those family dynamics, those sort of societal pressures really shape a person's worldview. But it's also a reminder that even in challenging circumstances, human connection can make all the difference. Right? Despite the hardships, Baldwin had these incredible mentors who nurtured his love for literature teachers like Gertrude Elise, Ayer Aurelia Miller, and County Cullen. They were absolutely crucial, offering him not just educational support, but a sense of belonging, a refuge.
It's fascinating how these mentors recognized his potential early on, saw that spark in him. And it's also interesting, that Baldwin himself briefly became a preacher in his teens, almost like foreshadowing, right? Honing those speaking skills that would later make him such a powerful writer and public figure.
Yeah, you can almost see that trajectory from the pulpit to the page.
Yeah.
This incredible ability to connect with people, to move them with words.
Yeah.
But of course, Baldwin's journey wasn't all about finding his voice. It was also about guess, confronting the harsh realities of being a young black man in 1940s America. And there's this pivotal moment described in the podcast, an incident at a diner in Trenton, New Jersey, that really brings this to the forefront.
Yeah, this incident is a turning point for Baldwin. He's full of dreams, aspirations, but he's constantly met with prejudice. And at this diner, he's flat out refused service because of his race.
It's hard to imagine that level of blatant discrimination and the humiliation, the anger that comes with it. How did Baldwin react to this?
It was visceral. He throws a water glass in a moment of frustration. A physical manifestation of the rage and injustice he felt. It was a wake-up call. A stark realization of how deeply ingrained racism was in American society. It forced him to confront the fact that his dreams, his dignity were constantly under threat.
That moment must have been so disillusioning, especially for someone who was already grappling with his identity, his place in the world. So how does he cope with this? What happens next?
He seeks refuge. He escapes to Greenwich Village.
Greenwich Village in the 1940s. That's quite a contrast to Harlem at the time.
Absolutely. Greenwich Village was a haven for artists, intellectuals, a melting pot of creativity, a stark contrast to the racial tensions and prejudice that Baldwin faced in Harlem. It became his artistic awakening, a space to explore his identity, his voice.
So it's in Greenwich Village that he finds this sense of community, of belonging. Were there any particular individuals who played a key role in this new chapter of his life?
Definitely. There's Buford Delaney, a painter who becomes a mentor and a close friend to Baldwin.
What was it about Delaney that drew Baldwin to him?
Delaney offered more than just friendship. He provided a sense of belonging, a space to create and explore. He encouraged Baldwin to delve deeper into his identity, his unique perspective, including his sexuality, which was a taboo subject at the time.
That's such an important point because Baldwin's willingness to explore his sexuality, especially as a black man in the 1950s, was incredibly groundbreaking and courageous. It speaks volumes about his commitment to honesty, to pushing boundaries. So when did he actually start writing? Was this around the time he met Delaney?
He begins working on his first novel, Crying Holy, during this period, but it faces numerous rejections from publishers.
That's heartbreaking. You pour your heart and soul into a work, and then it's met with closed doors.
Sadly, it reflects the literary landscape of the time. Publishers were hesitant. to embrace stories that challenge societal norms, particularly those dealing with race and sexuality, a struggle that many artists from marginalized communities continue to face even today.
So even though Baldwin found this artistic haven in Greenwich Village, he was still up against these systemic barriers. But he doesn't give up, does he? What keeps him going?
His commitment to his craft never wavered. He takes on various roles: essayist, book reviewer, honing his skills, finding avenues to make his voice heard. And then in 1948, he makes a life-altering decision. He moves to Paris.
Paris. That's a bold move.
I hate Paris.
He's drawn to its artistic energy, its community of writers, but it's also a way to escape America's suffocating racism to find some breathing room.
Paris, in the aftermath of World War II, it must have felt like a world away.
Absolutely. Paris was rebuilding, rethinking itself. It was a hub for artists and intellectuals, a place buzzing with creativity and new ideas.
So Paris becomes this sort of sanctuary for Baldwin, a place to further explore his craft. But I imagine his struggles didn't magically disappear just because he crossed an ocean. You're right. His journey wasn't just about escaping America. It was about confronting the universal problem of human prejudice, a theme that would become central to his work. He still faced financial hardships, the challenges of being an expatriate.
And yet, amidst those challenges, something extraordinary happens in 1953. His breakthrough, his novel Go Tell It on the Mountain, is published, and everything changes.
Go Tell It on the Mountain was deeply personal, exploring themes of race, religion, sexuality, identity. It announced Baldwin's arrival as a major literary force.
What was it about this particular novel that resonated so deeply with readers?
Its honesty, I think. It's full of autobiographical elements, offering a window into Baldwin's own coming-of-age experiences and the societal forces that shaped him. It resonated because it was raw, it was real, it explored universal human experiences.
But Baldwin wasn't just content with achieving literary success. He was also willing to challenge the status quo within the literary world. He published a pretty scathing critique of Richard Wright's Native Son, a move that definitely stirred things up.
That critique reveals a key aspect of Baldwin's philosophy. He believed Black characters deserved more than just simplistic, stereotypical portrayals. He pushed for complexity, nuance, paving the way for a more honest and multifaceted representation of the Black experience in literature.
It was a bold stance, especially considering Wright had been an early mentor to Baldwin.
It definitely created some tension between them. But it shows how committed Baldwin was to pushing boundaries, to challenging even those he admired.
And that refusal to be silenced extended to his exploration of sexuality, most notably in his novel Giovanni's Room.
Giovanni's Room was groundbreaking for its time. It explored homosexuality in a way that was incredibly bold, especially for a Black author in the 1950s.
I imagine that book was met with quite a bit of resistance.
Absolutely. Publishers were initially hesitant to print it. It highlighted the societal anxiety surrounding homosexuality.
It's hard to imagine pouring your heart into a work of art, only to be told it's too risky, too controversial. But Baldwin, he refused to back down.
He knew the importance of telling this story, and thankfully he found a publisher willing to take a chance on him.
And what a chance it turned out to be. Giovanni's Room became this landmark publication, not just for its literary merit, but for its challenge to societal norms. It really solidified Baldwin's reputation as a writer who was unafraid to tackle difficult subjects, to push the boundaries of what was considered acceptable, and to make people think.
Absolutely. And with that, we find Baldwin at this crossroads. His literary star is rising. And back in America, the civil rights movement is gaining momentum. It's a moment that would call him back home and propel him onto the world stage.
So as Baldwin's literary star is on the rise, right, he's achieving success in Paris. But back in America, the civil rights movement is really heating up. It's impossible for him to ignore. What were some of the events that really kind of shook him and pulled him back in?
There were a number of events that deeply affected Baldwin, but I'd say the horrific lynching of Emmett Till in 1955 was a turning point. The brutality, the injustice of it shook him to his core. And then in 1956, the bombing of Martin Luther King Jr.'s home in Montgomery. These acts of violence, these blatant attempts to silence those fighting for justice, they really ignited a fire in Baldwin.
Yeah, it's one thing to observe these events from a distance, but to witness that level of hatred and violence firsthand must have been a completely different experience.
Absolutely. And Baldwin felt this deep sense of responsibility to bear witness to what was happening in his homeland, to lend his voice to the struggle for justice and equality.
So in 1957, he returns to the U.S., right? And he doesn't just observe from afar, he immerses himself in the movement.
Yeah, he travels throughout the South. He meets with key figures like Martin Luther King Jr. He engages in dialogues that capture the complexities of the movement.
Can you share any specific examples from the podcast that illustrate this immersion?
There's this really powerful anecdote about Baldwin's encounter with a young black student in Tallahassee. This student was grappling with a deeply personal decision, whether or not to participate in the protests, knowing the risks involved.
It's a reminder that the civil rights movement wasn't just about abstract ideals. It was about life and death decisions, about courage in the face of real danger.
And what's fascinating is how Baldwin's perspective on the movement differed from both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah, he had his own unique take on things, right?
He saw racial reconciliation as this long and arduous process. He likened it to a challenging marriage that required both sides to confront uncomfortable truths, to work through deep-seated issues.
That's a really powerful analogy. It highlights the complexity, the need for ongoing dialogue and effort.
And as Baldwin was engaging with the movement, his own fame was growing exponentially.
Yeah, he's becoming this prominent voice on the national stage.
He appeared on the cover of Time magazine. He even met with Robert Kennedy.
So he thrust into the spotlight, his words reaching an even wider audience. And all of this culminates in one of his most impactful works, The Fire Next Time, published in 1963.
The Fire Next Time is this collection of essays that blends searing honesty with a profound sense of urgency. It's a call to action, urging white America to acknowledge its role in creating and perpetuating racial injustice.
What was it about The Fire Next Time that resonated so deeply with readers at the time?
I think it was the way Baldwin masterfully blended personal experience with social critique. His use of metaphors like comparing racial reconciliation to a difficult marriage made these complex ideas accessible and thought-provoking.
And even decades later, The Fire Next Time remains incredibly relevant.
It speaks to this ongoing struggle for racial justice, the need for continued dialogue and action.
But all of this level of engagement with such a tumultuous movement, it took a toll on Baldwin, right?
Oh, absolutely. The assassinations of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Kennedy deeply affected him.
Those were more than just the deaths of leaders. It was the shattering of hopes and dreams for so many.
Baldwin experienced a period of profound disillusionment and despair.
I can only imagine the weight of those losses, the feeling that everything you've been fighting for is crumbling around you.
And in response to all of this turmoil, Baldwin retreats to St. Paul-de-Vence in France.
So he's seeking refuge again.
In a way, yes. But it's important to remember that while he might have physically retreated, his commitment to addressing these big questions, love justice, the Black experience never wavered.
His writing continues to evolve, right?
Absolutely. He publishes novels like If Beale Street Could Talk and Just Above My Head, delving deeper into the complexities of Black life in America.
Exploring those themes of love, family, and the enduring power of hope.
It's important to acknowledge, though, that Baldwin wasn't without his personal struggles. He battled with alcohol and depression.
It's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds are human, vulnerable to the same pains and challenges we all face.
And those struggles make him even more relatable. They humanize him in a way that makes his work even more powerful.
Yeah, it's not just some distant icon speaking from a pedestal. It's a man grappling with real-life issues just like us.
Exactly. And the podcast describes this really poignant moment in Baldwin's final days as he battled cancer. Weak and in pain, he finds solace in the presence of his brother David.
It's a beautiful reminder that even in our most vulnerable moments, the bonds of family and love remain powerful sources of comfort and strength.
And sadly, James Baldwin passed away in 1987 at the age of 63.
What a loss for the literary world, for all those whose lives he touched.
His death was profound, but his legacy lives on in his writing, his unwavering commitment to justice and equality, the inspiration he continues to provide to artists, activists, and thinkers.
And even though he left this world too soon, he left behind an unfinished memoir titled Remember This House.
And that unfinished work found new life in the documentary I Am Not Your Negro, introducing a whole new generation to Baldwin's brilliance.
It's incredible how his work transcends time. It speaks to something fundamental about the human condition, something that resonates just as powerfully today as it did decades ago. You know, it's amazing how even in 2025, Baldwin's work still feels so relevant. His insights into race, identity, the human condition.
It's a testament to his ability to tap into something fundamental about the human experience. He wasn't just writing about his time, you know. He was writing about these enduring struggles for love, justice, belonging, things that we're still grappling with today.
And he doesn't shy away from making us confront uncomfortable truths, does he?
Yeah.
About ourselves, about our society.
Not at all. He makes us squirm a little bit sometimes. But that's what makes him so powerful. He forces us to look inward, to examine our own biases, our assumptions. He challenges us to be better, to do better.
And I think that's why his words still resonate so deeply. He speaks to our deepest fears and aspirations, our longing for connection, for understanding. So for listeners who are new to Baldwin's work, where would you suggest they begin?
The Fire Next Time is a classic for a reason. It's a great entry point, I think. It offers that blend of personal narrative and social critique that's both accessible and thought-provoking. But honestly, you can't go wrong with any of his essays. They're all brilliant.
And what about his fiction? Where should people start there?
Go Tell It on the Mountain is a must-read. It's beautifully written, and it gives you a glimpse into his early life, the influences that shaped his worldview. And Giovanni's Room is also a powerful one. It's a challenging novel, but ultimately very rewarding, exploring themes of love, sexuality, self-discovery.
This deep dive into Baldwin's life and work has been a truly enriching experience. It's like we've had this conversation with a brilliant mind, exploring these complexities of the human experience and the enduring power of words.
What's truly inspiring is that even in the face of immense hardship and disillusionment, Baldwin never gave up on the power of love and understanding. He believed we could be better, that we had a responsibility to strive for a more just and compassionate world.
And that belief, that unwavering hope, that's what makes his work so enduring. So, to all our listeners out there, I encourage you to seek out James Baldwin's writing. Let his words wash over you, challenge you, and inspire you.
And as you engage with his work, ask yourself, how can his insights help us create a world worthy of his legacy? A world where his words no longer feel like prophecy, but like history.